If you want to be in the driver's seat of your own physical and emotional health, then tune into this episode. Dr. Roland McCrady, Director of Research of the HeartMath Institute, explains how you can build resilience so you are not so affected by the world around you. Dr. McCrady also breaks down what is really going on with the Schumann frequencies, how solar and geomagnetic activity can affect your mood and behaviors, and the 3 different types of intuition that we are all privy to. Hi everyone, it's Dr. Jason Loken here, and I just wanted to take a minute to explain to everybody why I use EMF harmonized EMF protection technology on my phone and all of my devices, and why I think that it's one of the most important things that you can do right now to both protect and optimize your health. The device that you are using right now to watch this video is emitting an electromagnetic frequency that has been scientifically proven to be very damaging to your physiology, including the DNA itself. And there's thousands of different studies that have shown this to be true. The brain is especially susceptible to EMF exposure, and it's been shown that children's brains actually absorb EMF double the rate that an adult does. Now, this is telling us that not only is it important for us adults to protect ourselves from EMF, but it's especially important for our children. EMF harmonized products are the ones that I believe in and the ones that I advocate others to use because they've been scientifically proven to work. And they were designed by a mechanical engineer with over 3 decades of experience in the EMF industry. So again, if you are not using anything on your cell phones, on your computers, on your tablets, even on your router, then please click the link below, go to EMF Harmonized, and get the protection that you need. Hi everybody, welcome back to the show as we continue on with our series with science, mysticism, and beyond. And today I've got a guest, Dr. Roland McCrady, who I've been wanting to talk to for the last couple of years. So Dr. McCrady is head of the research department in the HeartMath Institute. And if you haven't come across HeartMath before, I highly recommend you check them out. I came across their work over a decade ago, and I found it to be incredibly beneficial for myself. And then I started to incorporate some of the technology that they have to assess something called heart rate variability and our ability to go into this heart-brain coherence state, which we talk about lots during this interview. But I found that to be so incredibly valuable for my patients as well as for myself. As a clinician, we're always looking to try and find ways to assess improvement through both subjective and objective measures. So you want to know that someone feels different and they're feeling better and they're seeing that change in their life, but you also want to measure certain things to see where their improvement is happening and let them kind of get back in the driver's seat of their own health. And so what I love about this type of work is that these tools are really beneficial, and not just the way that you can measure it, but also once you learn how to do it, you know what it feels like, and then you can help to get yourself into these beneficial coherent states at will. And one of the things that I think is so beneficial about it is that I talk a lot about resilience, and when I think about resilience, it's our capacity to be able to maintain our body, maintain our homeostasis, and not be so subjective to what's going on around us. So, and that could be everything from how much we're affected by the environment around us, the foods and the water and people's emotions and the climate socially, all of these different things that have a toll on our bodies. When you can dial in heart coherence and the work that HeartMath has been doing for decades, it is such a powerful tool to basically take control of your own physiology again. So I've been really looking forward to talk to Dr. McCrady about all of this, but even more, this last while, there has been so much talk about changes in the Schumann resonance and the Schumann frequencies. So if you're not aware of that, then we talk about that in this episode as far as what that means. But basically, there's been lots of talk about as these changes in the Schumann resonance, that is playing a part in this whole process of ascension, that it's creating changes on ourselves. And so when I was looking through some research on this to try and figure out who's really the best person to talk to about the Schumann frequencies, HeartMath came up over and over again. And after talking to Dr. McCrady, they have actually some of the, if not the most sophisticated measurements of the Schumann resonance in the entire planet. And so this is the guy to talk to if you want to really know what is actually going on with the Schumann resonance and know the facts. So Now, also, like we have done with many of the other guests, we will be doing a live event with Dr. McCrady as well. So any questions that you have for him after the episode, please send them in. We will have links on the YouTube channels. Again, all of these live events and all of the stuff that is outside of what we're doing with just the podcast is all on the YouTube channel. So just go to Dr. Jason Loken, ND, and you will find my YouTube channel. And that's where you'll see the live events that we do with the guests and the round table discussions that we will do with the guests as well. Unfortunately, we had to reschedule our last live with Dr. Northrup and Magenta Pixie and Marilyn Harper and Huna Flash because Magenta had laryngitis. So we are just trying to coordinate a new time, and we'll let you all know once we can set that up. But Dr. McCrady's is going to be February 26th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That is 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we will have notes that will go up on all the different platforms. So anytime you see that, either on YouTube or on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, just write down your questions that you would have specifically after you've heard the episode, and then we will bring all of those in and ask them. And at the time, if you have any questions too, write in and we'll try and get to those as well. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye. Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Roland McCrady. Roland is Director of Research of the HeartMath Research Center at the HeartMath Institute. As a psychophysiologist, Dr. McCrady's research interests include the physiology of emotion, heart-brain communication, and the global interconnectivity between people and the Earth's energetic systems. Findings from this research have been applied to the development of tools and technology to optimize individual and organizational health, performance, and quality of life. Dr. McCrady has acted as principal investigator in numerous studies examining the effects of emotion on heart-brain interactions and on autonomic, cardiovascular, hormonal, and immune system function, and the outcome studies to determine the benefits of positive emotion-focused interventions and heart rhythm coherence feedback in diverse organizational, educational, and various clinical populations. He's been featured in a number of documentaries, films such as I Am, The Truth, The Power of the Heart, Solar Revolution, and The Living Matrix, among many others. Dr. McCrady, what a great pleasure to have you on the show today.
Great to be here. I see we should have sent you a shorter bio.
That's actually not too long to some of the ones that I've had to edit down a little bit. I think some of you guys have been doing stuff for so long, your bios could end up taking probably 10 minutes to start it all off with. But wonderful to have you on here. I've been a big fan of the HeartMath work for over a decade now, and have incorporated it clinically for a long time with really great success. And it's such a powerful tool for individuals to use on their own. And when I was looking to some of your work, that as a psychophysiologist, I love that you were so interested in emotions, and particularly the effect that emotions play on things like cognition, behavior, and overall health. And again, it's something that I found so relevant clinically, because I would find so many times that the emotional status of somebody was often at the root of a lot of the other physiological problems that they had. So I wonder if maybe you can just share with us, how did you get so focused in this area? And then how did that eventually arrive at you meeting up with HeartMath?
My previous incarnation, I don't mean past life, but this time around, is I was a communication engineer. I used to work for Motorola, electromagnetics, radiational physics, that kind of stuff. And anyway, I kind of realized that, working for big companies like that wasn't for me. And I ended up getting into consciousness studies through my deeper questions, I guess would be a way to say it, around actually electromagnetism and these types of things, because just wasn't satisfied with the answers that we still have, from a rigorous scientific perspective. Wonderful mathematic formulas that describe what a magnetic field is or how they behave, not what it is, but how they behave. Whenever I'd ask the question about, well, what actually is it? It was always from the professors and all that. Don't ask, here's the formula that describes it.
Mm-hmm.
That was just never very satisfying. So that led me into other things, and kind of as a hobby, I guess, which in turn led me to California to get I think it was the first degree granting institution in consciousness studies at that time. This is back in the 70s. Right? So,
That makes sense that it would be probably California.
Yeah, and it was. But anyway, through that and that group of people and stuff, I got involved and was helped create one of the first companies to introduce spirulina to the world. As a way to feed people, that humanitarian side. And long story short, we ended up building a demonstration plant in Southern California, way ahead of our time, I think. Actually, proving that you can go into the desert and grow this stuff and feed the world's hungry population.
Wow.
And that went nowhere. And not because of technology, just because it was blocked at political, all kinds of levels. And long story short, that's when in hindsight, I say my idealism bubble got popped. I thought, we go prove this can work. It'll do something. And as I used to say, even back then in those days, it's really about consciousness. We've got to increase consciousness. But after that experience, it took it from more of a mental concept to a visceral, real, much, much deeper understanding that it's not about technology. It's about the consciousness. And so I said, the heck with this humanitarian stuff. I'm going to go make money again. So I started another company, which became very successful, by the way, in a very short time in the field of electrostatics. And boy, I tell you, we were doing high level stuff with big companies, Ford, Chrysler, the Intel types of the world, and saving the life of microprocessors, basically. I won't go into details. And it was a great ride. Don't get me wrong, but it reached a certain point that another sports car in the driveway wasn't going to quite do it. That deeper kind of yearning that I guess I was born with or had, and ended up meeting Doc Childrey, the founder, who's the founder of HeartMath, through those past connections and things. Because I had kind of said to myself that I'm not going to expend my life energy on this unless it's about really something that can increase consciousness in a mass way. I'm wasting my time, and I might as well, go enjoy my sports cars and, those kinds of things. Anyway, that was quite an experience. And I would say he really facilitated a much deeper heart awakening in me. And I had some experiences that I won't go into, but so that led me to basically follow my own heart. And so I sold that company quickly for a fraction of what it was really worth to the employees. And here I am.
Yeah, well, one thing that's similar is that a lot of the people, even in this series, consciousness is really where the focus is for almost everybody around this, and they're all doing it in their own sort of specific way. And really, how I look at it too is it's like everything ultimately is about consciousness. I mean, and that's really where I think it's coming. And I feel like that's why even the way, like you said, your focus was more around electromagnetism and different things along this lines. And I feel like everything's kind of keeps shifting. It's been very biochemical for a long time, and there's still that sort of part of things, but I feel like it just keeps moving and shifting into different ways of evaluating. So we're looking more at things like electromagnetism and things like intention and concentration and light and frequency and vibration and a different language that we're using to describe things.
Yeah, well, the word I would use these days is just energetics. We talk about light. Well, okay, photons, that's an electromagnetic wave. I mean,
yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about, HeartMath talks a lot about heart coherence and heart rate variability. And so for people that are new to this, go and check out Deborah Rosman's episode that was in we did a series before on mind, body, spirit. And so if you just click on that in the inspirehealthpodcast.com website, you'll see where her episode is, and you can watch that because she goes through a lot of the basics on all of this. But maybe just a bit of an overview on what do we mean by heart coherence and what is heart rate variability?
Yeah, let's start with heart rate variability, because you have to start with that to get coherence. And it means you've already done an episode with Debbie. I'll keep this pretty brief. But basically, in a healthy person, well, really anybody, but especially unless there's a serious clinical challenge or disease, our heart rate changes with each and every heartbeat. So the heart is not a metronome like a lot of, that's a total myth. So in other words, the time between each consecutive pair of heartbeats is always varying. And that's a good thing. It's loss of that signifies, poor health and future health problems are going to occur in these types of things. So that's what underlies the heart rhythm. Most people have heard of or know that we have a heart rhythm, right? Which means that the heart's changing up and down and, just this kind of repeating rhythmic activity. And that's because of heart rate variability. So if there were no time changes between each pair of heartbeats, the heart rate would be a flat line, which is not a good thing. Now, it looks like that on TV shows and stuff because that's all averaged out. But in reality, heart rate is always speeding up and slowing down. Now, as it turns out that the heart rhythm or the pattern of the heart rhythm reflects a lot about what's going on inside of actually the brain, the body, the autonomic nervous system. But it's really the whole neural axis is involved to create heart rate variability or HRV. Again, I don't want to go, we could spend a whole hour just on that. But it's the pattern that reflects a deeper level of information above and beyond how much of this variability we have, which is also important. So in our early days, we started our lab, early 90s. We were looking kind of started out, a lot of labs doing this kind of space psychophysiology of looking at physiological correlates to different mental and emotional states. Right? Now, interesting to see at that time, by the way, there were maybe 3 papers in the medical literature, on all the searches of positive emotions, hundreds, thousands on depression, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. But that's changed a lot. This is long before the positive psychology, movement and all that. I mean, way, good, probably 15 years before that emerged. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we were, wiring people up to all this, these 3 acronym words, EEGs and ECGs and EMGs and, we got all that stuff. Anyway, so we were a little ahead of the curve in looking at things like appreciation or compassion or love. And, looking at all these different things. And as it turned out, and this is actually looking at HRV or heart rate variability, it wasn't even called that yet. I mean, we were even kind of before that that term had been coined, and which was one of my mentors actually, who is credited for coining the term HRV, Don Singer. Anyway, what we observed is that when people were actually really feeling things like appreciation or gratitude or compassion, the heart was beating out a completely different rhythmic pattern than when we were, we used to have a lot of fun, scaring people or getting into different states and, frustration or anger or whatever. Back then, that's a whole other story. But anyway, so this pattern kept emerging. It's kind of like this sine wavy, a lot of people have probably seen images of it now. It's going to come through a lot. That reflected, it's like the body was literally flipping into a different mode, different state of function when we felt these heartfelt positive feelings. So about 2 years of dialogue with my advisory board meetings, a lot of people at that time, what are we going to call this new state? And that ended up being coherence, heart coherence, or physiological coherence, different terms that it's used by. So basically that's an optimal state. I would say that there's 400 plus independent studies now that show that when you teach people how to make that shift into heart coherence, that it has a lot of benefits. Mm-hmm. Everything from, faster health recovery to performing better test scores for kids. I mean, all over the world now. So.
What I love about it is that, it's always nice for people to have both subjective and objective markers, I think. So I know clinically it's like, you want to know how patients are feeling. You want to know how people are feeling and that they're changing and that they feel happier, or they feel more positive or something along those lines. But it's also nice to be able to watch objectively what's going on so And then I remember when I first did that, I came across the HeartMath stuff probably maybe 12 years back. And it was actually right after a really bad breakup. And I remember sitting with the HeartMath, with the M-Wave.
Oh, yeah. So when you're saying HeartMath, just to clarify, you're talking about some of the devices.
Yes. So okay. I should say when I'm talking about HeartMath, I think just because to me, they've been sort of the main forefront body that has been done so much of the work around heart rate variability and then heart-brain coherence. So,
Yeah.
but yes, when I first came across HeartMath, which was about 12 years ago, and came across the tools that they used, I actually got the M-Wave, and that's the computer program that you would use for people that aren't familiar with it. And I used to hook myself up and do it for about a half hour every day. And it was right after a really challenging relationship where I was feeling like I was pretty stuck low. And so it was such a powerful tool to help me reframe things. And what was really neat was what I found was that once I was able to sit for that 30 minutes staying completely in a coherent state, in sort of the green zone, and then what I was able to do is then I could even bring up the thoughts of something that was challenging for me. It would sometimes flip me back to being in an incoherent state. But then as I went back through the breathing exercise while holding that in mind, it would still allow me to get back into a coherent state. And then what I found is it naturally changed the context of the situation for me. It was such a powerful tool to be able to have this in mind while I felt differently, and then I could actually perceive the event from a very different perspective. So I found it such an amazing tool for being able to get out of that almost habituation that we tend to get into. It gives you new eyes to look at different situations from.
Yeah, neat. I'm glad you. Thanks for sharing that. And just but probably you may not know the history here, but and this happens a lot, that people that get it, an M-Wave or an Interbalance, one of our HRV centers, and we were actually the first. I guess you could kind of say we invented the HRV biofeedback. Put with it, the first to ever do it and identify. Of course, that's comes out of our research of identifying the coherent, incoherent states and all that. So what you're describing is the device that measures, has little clips you put on your ear or different sensors that reflect in real time your heart rhythm, your HRV, and analyze the pattern of it. But that came much later. So so a lot of people think that's what HeartMath is, are these devices. And of course it is, but it's part of HeartMath. It's really about the tools and techniques and strategies for really getting into a coherent state and aligning with our deeper self is really what it's about. There's a number of core techniques. So we were teaching that all over the world for years before in fact, our trainers used to have these suitcases they would lug around with basically biopack devices in them that they could do demos in classrooms and trainings. And they kept saying, wow, when people really see this shift themselves, they get somebody out of the audience and hook them up. And it was quite the production. So we said, okay, well, let's see if we can't come up with a really inexpensive device that people can have anywhere instead of having to do this. So that is when that came in, in the early 2000s, actually. So.
Okay. Well,
so we're really more about teaching people how to better self-regulate, how to really get their systems in sync and aligned.
Well, absolutely. And I think even the concept of self-regulation has been really huge over the last probably 5 years. I've heard lots more about it than ever before. And kind of this idea of self-regulation, of being able to regulate that autonomic state a little bit more. So getting out of fight or flight more, back into rest and digest, and being able to get all of the benefits that come when you're out of that sort of hyper-aroused state or that stressful state.
Yeah, fair enough. Probably you talked, Jason, about emotions right early in this conversation. So we focused a lot on that, on the self-regulation of emotions. And here's why, we kind of go with where the consciousness of the general population is. But it's emotions that run the show physiologically. Now, this is really easy to show here in the lab. We can have you wired up to whatever, brain waves or ECGs and stuff. And thoughts don't really do much. I mean, yeah, we can measure changes, the serial 7 subtractions or, thinking that thoughts about good thoughts, bad thoughts, whatever, right? But when you trigger an emotion, right, you actually feel something, positive or negative, boy, big changes happen quick. So it's really the emotions that run the show. They're what are driving the activity in our brain and nervous system, in our hormonal system, all the stuff that, these are kind of down the stream outflows of that. Now, of course, thoughts can trigger emotions and emotions can trigger thoughts. And, we need to get into that quagmire. But But it's really the emotional management for most people, or failures of the capacity to self-regulate their emotions, that underlies most of the problems in health and wellness, and I would say in larger society.
Yeah.
That's kind of why we focused there a lot. We now more shifted into social and global coherence and these types of things. But
Yeah,
that helps give a context here of why the emotional self-regulation is so important.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's basically the foundation for so many of the problems. And like you said, the work that you guys are doing all revolves around self-regulation. And if emotions are running the show, then to be able to self-regulate is what's going to put you back in the driver's seat of being able to manage that.
That's a good way of saying it. Do we want to be ran around by unmanaged emotions, or do we want to be in the driver's seat? And then really able to, maintain our composure in challenging situations. This is why we do a lot of work in law enforcement and first responders and hospital,
right.
Because we're not, a lot of programs still to this day talk about, stress. And of course, stress is a serious issue. It's probably more eating the life force out of more people than they realize.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of programs are talking about this bad guy sympathetic nervous system that's out of hand. You call about fight, flight, and you got to, activate the parasympathetic, and it's all about relaxation. And that's true. I mean, we do need to relax, have that skill. But that is not what I guarantee you that a sports coach is telling the team, okay, guys, let's get together and relax before they hit the field, right? Or,
mm-hmm.
you try and tell that to a law enforcement officer or a first responder. So the point I'm making here is there's a lot of times we actually need a higher heart rate.
For
we
sure.
got to take care of business. There's things we need to do. But so coherence, physiologically speaking, is not the same as relaxation. You can use coherence to help trigger relaxation, but it's really so with practice, people can learn how to be in a coherent state. So think of heart coherence as equaling mental composure, emotional stability. That's really what it correlates with. So you can be at any heart rate and learn how to shift into coherence or be in a coherent state. Right. So sometimes, it's really a high performance state, both physiologically, reaction times, coordination, but also mentally, the capacity to make good decisions and these types of things. Hopefully that gives a little bit of a context. So our message isn't just all about relaxing and chilling out.
I like that. I mean, when I think about it with from an individual level, like with patients, I find most of the time it's just because they're generally so caught in like a stress cycle all the time. And for them, they need something to try, and that would be the balance, would be to get back out of that more.
Well, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But the way you're describing, I really like that too, because that also makes me think of like a flow state. It's like when you are in that high performance state where athletes are just on, and you can still have that sympathetic drive going, which is going to be what's going to get the job done, but you can be in that within a regulated state. That's actually that's a really powerful place to be in.
Yeah. So it's when you're more emotionally regulated and you're kind of an inner ease state. It's one of the ways we would call it and talk about it.
Yeah. One thing that also comes up is they talk about heart intelligence. And I'm wondering if you can discern the difference between sort of what heart intelligence means compared to, say, more of like intellectual intelligence. What do we mean by that?
Yeah. Good question. We actually mean that literally, by the way. And so what I'm going to suggest here is that there's so many ways I could answer that. I'm going to kind of go back. I don't know, this is just kind of coming in. So I haven't done this in a long time, but a few years ago, we were doing the certification training here. And then there was this one older medical doctor who'd kind of been around the block, was in the training, and we were having dinner, and he said, all right, Roland, come here. There's more to this than you're talking about in this training. Okay, I want it in one, give me one sentence. What's this really about? And so I sat there and kind of pondered, and it was more kind of an intuition, I guess, that came in on my part, how to answer him that, would satisfy him. I said, well, think of it this way. Mind, the mind is to brain, spirit is to heart.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he got it. So what I really mean by that, and a number of studies are kind of indicating this may not be a crazy idea, but what we're really saying is that, or suggesting that we have the physical heart, of course, which has its own neural structures and the heart-brain communication and all of that. Can keep this discussion at a physiological level and coherence and all the benefits. But at a deeper level, also suggesting that we also have what's called an energetic heart or spiritual heart. And that's been around forever. Mm-hmm. We didn't invent that concept, of course. In fact, it's the most central theme of all the great world religions is that the heart, not the brain, is that access point to wisdom and courage and all of these types of things. So we're just suggesting that's actually real. That the energetic heart is a real thing with real structure. It's just at a vibrational level. And that's the access point, if you will, or the eye of the needle that you have to go through. Or that's the kind of transducer is another word I could use here, to what every culture seems to have their own language for. You can call it, you think of it as your higher self, your spirit, your soul, access to those kind of things we can't put under a microscope. So that's what we mean by heart intelligence, is the intelligence that's sourced from that higher dimensional energetic part of our undivided wholeness. Mm-hmm. So I'm really actually saying it is part of us, right? It's David Bohm would have called it our undivided wholeness. That's what he was talking about, and many others in different ways. So when we get, as it turns out, when we get into that heart coherent state, that's increasing the coupling, if you will, to our energetic heart, and thus to our here at HeartMath we just call it our larger self, our large, to kind of take it out of religion and all that, because we mean this scientifically and literally. That so that we're accessing another domain of intelligence that's past the mind brain level of intelligence.
I think that's a really important part of that, because one thing that I think also that at least that I feel is important, and that I'm trying to share with people is, and there's nothing wrong with sort of the intellect and reason. They all got really important pieces, but it's sort of this idea of kind of reconnecting back to that sense of intuition, or how I think of it sometimes as being back connected to that gut instinct and that heart intelligence. And then from that place, then I feel like our ability to even use reason and logic changes a little bit. It's elevated
into now becoming a servant of who we really are.
Right. Yes.
Rather than, because really the mind separates it. I want to know why, ambitions and things that really keep us locked into a certain dimensional awareness that we see outplaying in the planet, right? I would say right now. So the shift that everybody's talking about, or a lot of people are talking about, from my perspective, really is a shift in consciousness. Mm-hmm. It's when we align with that larger self, via the energetic heart, that actually that's where finally the intelligence and really the power, I can use that word in this context, to finally bring the mind and emotions into management comes from. Right? But from a deeper source within us.
Yeah.
Now, one of the ways in trainings would sometimes bridge this topic is, how many, maybe last week or in the last few days, have you had a situation where you've been asked to do something or thought you wanted to do something, kind of a mind, stimulation thing, but you just had a deeper inner sense, a feeling that, no, that's probably not the right thing to be doing. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of the dichotomy between heart and mind, right? Or larger self and mind. And if most people are really honest and sit back and really ponder that a little bit, we've all had situations where we've clearly had those inner guidance or inner promptings. We took the mind route anyway.
Yeah.
And then, let that play out a few days, week, whatever. And we kind of go, oh my God, I wish I'd have followed that, inner prompting I had. Or vice versa. You might say something, that you really regret to somebody, and you have that inner prompting to, you really need to go clean that up and, kind of apologize or get clarity, whatever, but we don't do it, and then that leads into separations and that harm friendships. And, you see that in families all the time. Something that somebody said probably didn't even mean it 20 years ago, and they still ain't talking to their brother, or, these kinds of things that get created. Mm-hmm. The mind and those separations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to have you on the show for this too, because from my perspective, it's what the HeartMath Institute has been able to they've really kind of helped structure it in a way where it helps people. From my perspective, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but from my perspective, they've really done a great job with almost refining a bit of a process to assist that innate ability to enhance that connection again. Because what it feels like to me is that we've been very disconnected in a lot of ways from our intuition, and even from our almost even learning from our emotions in a lot of ways, and valuing how we feel. And so we're very good with sort of thinking logically and rationally a lot of the times, but the shift in conscious part of this that it feels like is going on, part of this to me feels like it is what's important is to be able to reconnect back to the body in a very profound way. And then from that, then, like you said, you have this bigger field that then all of this stuff works in.
True. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the qualities. Yes, the difference between mind intelligence and heart intelligence is the mind can easily disassociate from the body and we get locked into our know what we knows, right? And, which is just from a mental perspective. You actually shared, Jason, a really neat story yourself when you were going through after your breakup, that when you started getting coherent, you started getting, it changed your perspective.
Yeah.
So you kind of, I would say, it's not put the words in your mouth, but what you were describing is you were able to rise above, a certain lower vibration in consciousness as you got coherent, which aligned you, I would suggest, to your larger self. Yeah, and that intuitive information and guidance is what actually was able to lift you.
That's exactly what it felt like, Roland. And that's how when I think about consciousness, I think of it like sort of climbing up a mountain, and it's not that one area of the mountain's better than the other area, but they will have a inherently different view from different parts of the mountain. And then when you see something from a different state of consciousness, it's not like you're trying to get yourself to change something. You just inherently see something different, and then it feels different. And I think because it then feels different, you can now really own that, and you're not trying to convince anything.
Yeah, and maybe that might help here a little bit. We're using the word consciousness a lot, but in this context, we just think of consciousness being awareness.
Right.
A wider view of awareness. And the mountain's a great example, a great analogy there. But just learning how to get coherent and really tune into the heart's intuitive guidance is like putting an escalator up the mountain. All right, we just you don't have to make the climb. We can actually get an escalator ride or an elevator ride up it, by learning how to really get in coherence and learn to really listen to the voice of the heart.
Right. So we know what then coherence is. So what gets in the way of coherence? What kind of things are going on a regular basis that make it difficult to be in a heart coherent state?
Well, unmanaged emotions, or all of our mental programming and histories and biases, and we even run into it in the scientific world. To me, science to a large degree has become the world's new religion. Unfortunately, with some very narrow-minded. Great studies have been done in certain that would be a little bit wider outside of the minds what I was taught in school, box, right? And it's literally, don't confuse me with the data my mind's made up. Can still happen, but it's it takes new generations a lot of times for the new kind of things to emerge. So I'll give you an example. Well, this is actually pretty well accepted now because it's been verified so many times, and even meta-analysis now done on the studies. But so dialing back again, I guess this was also in the late 90s. One of the comments that we were hearing so much from people who were learning the HeartMath tools and techniques, and getting more coherent, and really transformational experiences. But one of the most common things that we hear and still do is that our intuition. God, my intuition is like on steroids. It's just like radically, noticeably different. And the second thing they would usually say is, and the synchronicities are now, I've come to expect them. So, but I would suggest that's because of the intuition. The synchronicities are, anyway. But so we started doing psychophysiological research on the topic of intuition. And now we kind of, in my writings and papers, I suggest there's 3 types of intuition to really help clarify this. Probably don't have time to go into that, but the study I wanted to started all this was one where people were sitting at a computer and they we got them all wired up, brain waves and ECGs and skin conductance, these types of things. And the computer, basically you go through a bunch of trials, but you're going to see a photograph in the future so we used a picture from what's called the International Effective Picture Set. So these are images that have been well researched to elicit a particular type of emotion and strength of emotion. Right. So we took photographs from the two extreme opposite ends of this picture set. On the one end is, like bad guys with knives in a woman's throat and snakes striking at the screen, jarring kind of things. I mean, they come up and kind of even jump sometimes when these pop up. And then the other end of the spectrum, you've got bunny rabbits and nature scenes and flower pots and things like this. The way this, I won't go into the gory detail. This is all published for anybody that wants to dig into the rigor of it. But basically, the data is all recorded before the computer randomly decides what photograph it's going to show to the person. So nobody can possibly know what this future picture is going to be. It's truly a randomized, and there's a lot of other controls that go in here. So one of the things we were interested in, and this had already kind of been shown to a certain degree. Dean Radin had done some work showing skin conductance changes, but prior to, seeing a photograph. We took it quite a bit deeper. Here's the end. Through a lot of work, but basically what we found is the heart is the first system measurably to shift prior to seeing this upcoming picture. So it's heart first. The heart sends a measurably different neurological signal to the brain. You can actually detect it and see it change. You can actually trace it all through the brain. Then you get a brain response, all before the future picture. Then an efferent or descending change in the autonomic nervous system for the body, so the gut feeling. So the gut gets the credit because that's where we feel it, or the hair on the back of the neck. But it's actually heart, brain, body, gut, hair on the back of the neck, those kinds of things, where it then becomes a conscious feeling after the body changes.
And it was picking up on it prior to the picture being...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, depending upon the protocol, it's really I'll call it an artifact of the experimental protocol. The first experiments, it was a 6-second window, so it was 5.5 seconds before you saw the picture. And then later, different paradigms, 20 seconds, so it was a different window. Because we know intuitions aren't limited to X number of seconds before an insight. But,
I remember that study. I remember reading that study, and I thought that was really fascinating. And it's really neat because it's like these things that we often attribute to, these deeper senses of intuition and whatnot. We often attribute some of these things to people that have to, meditate forever and yogis and stuff like this. It's almost like these superpowers, but they're all inherent within everybody. They just need to kind of be fine-tuned a little bit. And if anything, I think just to get out of that almost habitual state that we tend to sort of live in and day out, but then we can tap back into it fairly quickly.
Yeah, and so as I mentioned, we have there's 3 kind of high-level basic types of intuition. Everybody has the capacity for all 3 types. Some people are more kind of wired for one than another, but ideally we have a good balance of all 3.
What are the 3 types of intuition, Roland?
Well, the first type is implicit knowledge, or implicit kind of also complicit learning, and that's most of the books that are written on intuition and the studies in academia are all based on implicit processes. That's safe because that's the brain and past memories that we're comparing to in the now.
Yeah.
So it's an important type of intuition.
Sure.
Expert knowledge, things like this, all comes from that. The nurse that goes into an older nurse that's been around the block, goes into a patient's room. Oh, they're going to code in the next hour, right?
Right.
You ask them, how do you know that? I don't know. I just know it, right? And a newer nurse standing next to us going, what are you talking about? Right? But there's a lot of examples, and insight comes from that as well, and a subtype. Energetic sensitivity is the second type, and that is our nervous system's capacity to detect and respond to real measurable signals from the environment, like the heart field, the magnetic field from others. So empathy is in that category. There are a lot of examples, but there are people who can feel earthquakes coming.
Yeah.
That's real. We now know we can measure changes in the Earth's magnetic field prior to earthquakes. Right, that's to another project. So that's, and there's a lot of examples there. But if these are real signals that our nervous system is detecting and alerting us to, that we don't really, we start pattern matching and going, oh, associating that feeling with X thing, right? And then the third type we call non-local. intuition, and non-local is the kind of a simple way of saying it is the kinds of intuitive perceptions and insights you can't write off or assign to the other two categories, things that are across time and space. Right? Like, you start thinking about somebody's name that you haven't thought of in years, right? And then you get a phone call from them or a letter, or moms who know their kids are up to or in distress or doing something they shouldn't be doing, and they're on the other side of town or the planet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think of those a lot like synchronicities. Well, I remember when I was doing a lot of the HeartMath stuff, that was also around the same time that I started to notice so many different synchronicities. So for me at the time, I remember it was numbers. I would see certain numbers all the time, and like to the point that it was just almost spooky, like how often they would show up in places. But again, it was a comforting feeling at the same time. It sort of was, for me, it felt like it was like, oh, those are just all part of kind of like a deeper guidance, it felt like. Now, one thing that I think is also really fascinating, when we talk about heart rate variability and we talk about heart-brain coherence, and then we talk about it a lot for how it affects the individual. It helps them with their self-regulation. There's a lot of different health benefits. There's changes in certain hormones and stuff like that that are all beneficial. And then also we talk about the importance of that then sort of ripples out to community and even to sort of global. How does that work?
Okay, so let's just do the kind of local level first, and then it makes it, I think, easier to expand to the global. So when we put electrodes across the person's chest to measure the electrocardiogram, I mean, it's called the electrocardiogram for a reason, for measuring electricity, right? Literally.
Yeah.
And you put them on the brain, the same thing. You put electrodes on it. What's actually being measured there is current flow, right? Electrical ion, electrons flowing. That's what those devices, EEGs and ECGs and et cetera, are all measuring. Whenever you have a current flow, this is kind of physics 101, is you generate a magnetic field. Right? Now, the electrodes don't see that. You have to have a different instrument to measure the magnetic component called a magnetometer. Now, one of the qualities of magnetic fields is they go through things. And that's why people say, well, how do you know that? Well, I'm ex-communication engineer, right? Cell phones work indoors.
Right.
You don't believe me, stop using your cell phone indoors. So it's the electric and magnetic fields are quite different things. We call it electromagnetism, but a lot of people don't quite get that. But anyway, the magnetic component easily, so in the case of we're measuring heart-brain type things or physiological measures, whenever you have those current flows, those associated magnetic fields easily radiate external from the body. Now, how do I know that? Well, we can measure it, right? Now, in fact, most larger or teaching hospitals have devices called MCGs, magnetocardiograms. Actually, this is routinely done. You can put sensors external. You don't even touch the body. You measure the magnetic field. You go into all the reasons for that. But so if you start, of course, you put them close to get a high signal noise ratio if you're really trying to measure heart functions and brain functions and things. But you can back those sensors up. And with the heart, the cardiac field, with today's technology, magnetometers that you'd find in the hospital, you start losing the detection, the ability to see that signal about 3 feet from the body. If you're talking about the heart, you lose it about an inch from the head for the brain. So clearly the heart is the big player if we're talking about our field environment, right? By far. Now, so one of the things we kind of did, and this was actually really easy in hindsight, is you actually use the same kind of techniques I would have used back in my Motorola days to look at is there information being carried by that field? In other words, if I'm looking at a radio transmitter, you decode to see what modulation is, the information, the voice, the picture, whatever. And lo and behold, it's pretty easy to see that you can actually use spectral analysis techniques and see that the magnetic field of the heart is carrying information. In fact, we can just look at the data in the field and tell with about 75% accuracy somebody's discrete emotional state. And these different patterns. So we're broadcasting, right? And the information's there. And this is all published. People want to look into the details. So then the next step was, okay, well, that's pretty cool. Makes sense, right? Do our nervous systems also act as detectors? right? So I started doing studies with multiple people, and lo and behold, that was actually really easy to do as well. It's called signal averaging techniques, and you can see that like people in a room together, that one person's brain waves will literally synchronize to another person's heartbeats, and a lot of these different interactions that are going on at an energetic level. This in dance, if you will, of energetic communication is always going on. Usually at an unconscious level, but it's kind of a practical example of that. It's since I've really started paying more attention, to conversations and watching other people. You thought you can probably relate to this. You're just kind of off to the side watching two people talk, and maybe one person will say something that what the words are, that you can kind of almost feel an energetic tone. Maybe they're anxious or frustrated, but it has nothing to do with what they're saying. And the other person who actually says what they felt the person was feeling, and not at all what they said. Have you ever watched that? I mean, I've actually seen people do that. Well, you said so-and-so, and they're going, well, no, I didn't. And they actually didn't say it, but what the person's reflecting back is actually accurate.
Yeah.
To what the vibration, what the people was actually radiating. So it's a big problem in the miscommunication, right? For example. Yeah. So anyway, we were able to show that there's this very real energetic communication and dance that goes on at kind of the local level. Now, this is kind of huge. And then other experiments have been done now, independent of us, and of course we've done them too, that show that when we're in a coherent state, that field, that more coherent field that we're radiating, actually can help lift others into a more coherent state, even if that other person doesn't have a clue what's going on. It's not magic. I mean, if you're really mad, you're going to stay mad. It's not going to. But it creates a field environment that kind of helps you get back to balance a little quicker. Maybe kind of calm down or whatever that the situation is. So that now that's what's really intriguing is you can also see in where there's a positive emotional connection between people, that it goes another level, that their heart rhythms can actually synchronize, that we can literally get in sync with each other through this energetic communication. And some experiments that have been going on very recently, which are mind kind of boggling, I shouldn't be surprised by this, but are actually showing that can actually occur in people that have a strong, positive emotional connection, even non-locally. Mm-hmm. Now that's pretty cool. I mean, but what's really blows my mind is that the researcher that's showing this, guy Peter Granger in the UK, is that can even work when one of the two people in the experiment doesn't know the experiment's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, so that's showing a level of interconnectivity that is mediated by emotion. Right? If you have that kind of, I'll work with you, but that's about it, that kind of arm's length, then you don't see synchronization. You can still see the communication dance going on. So anyway, that's kind of the local, what I'll call local level. And then your second part of your question, which gets into the what we call the Global Coherence Initiative work. We've installed magnetometers, ultrasensitive magnetometers around the Earth now. So we've got sites, one here in California where I'm at, Canada, let's see if I can remember them all, Lithuania, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, New Zealand. I'm probably forgetting some. But anyway.
I should have pulled up the list. I was looking at it just the other day, but I think you listed most of the main ones. Yeah,
we would have had another one in Colombia had it not been for COVID by now. But I wish we didn't have to do this. This is really expensive and a lot of work to do. But these are ultra-sensitive magnetometers that are specifically designed to measure the resonant frequencies in the Earth's fields. So there's gazillions of, well, not gazillions, but a lot of magnetometers out there, but they're more what are called flux gate. They're measuring the strength of the magnetic field and the ripple, the noise, for protecting power lines and satellites and stuff like that. They don't see what, our system sees, which is the moving fields, the vibrating fields, the resonant frequencies. So, well, here, I'll make a long story kind of short here if I can. So we've got the Earth. I actually got a little prop. I said this in an interview a while back. I need a little prop. And so somebody sent me one. I can remember to use it. So we've got Earth here. And then you got the North and South Pole, right? And we all know that the geomagnetic field, right? So, which extends out into space, many thousands of miles. So if we time travel back to science class, when most people got to dump iron filings on a glass plate, put your magnet under it, and they kind of jump around and show you, and they visualize the field, the shape of the field of whatever your magnet happens to be. Mm-hmm. Right. So, but if you remember those iron filings lined up in lines, right? That wasn't a homogeneous black blob. So that's a way of visualizing what are called magnetic field lines. Are real things. So the Earth's magnetic field lines are just like that. And here's the really neat thing that I certainly didn't learn back in junior high or whenever it was, science class, is magnetic field lines, this is not a metaphor, literally, can act like guitar strings. You can pluck them and they vibrate. And just like a guitar string, depending upon the length and the tension, will change its note or its frequency that it resonates at. So it has a resonant frequency. So what's plucking the field lines of Earth, which is turning, right, is the solar wind rushing by. So as the Earth is turning, and so is the sun. The solar wind's traveling about 1 million miles per hour. Earth is turning, it's plucking the lines. They're vibrating. And these are technically called field line resonances. Imagine that. Science finally said something simple. And what's really kind of amazing is that one of the primary resonant frequencies of these field line resonances is a frequency, it's called, in frequency language, 0.1 hertz. Now that might sound familiar because that's exactly the same frequency as the human heart rhythm when we're in a coherent state.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating when you start to hear stuff like that, and it's just like, this whole sort of macrocosm in the microcosm. It's like you see that over and over again all the time.
Yeah, right. Now here's what's wild. So I'll say interesting. So and then the other set of magnetic waves that a lot of people have heard about these days, and a lot of misinformation out there, by the way, I'll say up front here, are called Schumann resonances. Now they're a completely different thing than what I just described. Mm-hmm. So we got our Earth again. So Schumann resonances are magnetic waves kind of traveling around the Earth, right? But they're trapped between the surface of the Earth and what's called the bottom of what's called the ionosphere. So we can think of the ionosphere as a soap bubble around the planet, and it's a plasma. Kind of keep it short and simple here, but basically one of the properties of plasmas like this is they act like a mirror to low frequency magnetic waves. So when something sources a magnetic wave vibrating in this cavity, those that fit the geometry, right, become basically globally propagating standing waves. That just means they're everywhere all the time, traveling around. And there's 8 of these. The first one is 7.83 hertz, first measured experimentally in around 1960. Okay. So that was immediately recognized, well, wait a minute, that's the same as our brainwave frequency of what's called low alpha in most systems. So, but all we now know, all 8 Schumann resonances overlap with brainwaves.
Oh, now, that's fascinating.
Yeah, now magnetically speaking, Schumann resonances are tiny compared to the field line resonances. In fact, it's about the same ratio as I was talking about how the heart field, you can measure feet away from the body, brainwaves an inch.
Like an inch versus 3 feet, right?
So it's about the same ratio between the field line resonances and the Schumann resonances. Now, I don't know if that means anything or not. It may.
Well, I guess
but it's an interesting observation that,
Well, what's interesting, and so it sounds like the Schumann resonance then are more related to brain frequencies, and the field line resonance are more related to the heart frequency.
Heart and cardiovascular and autonomic nervous system. Yeah.
So this has been something that I was wondering about, and there's a couple of things around here because this is something that's come up a lot, and I wanted to get your expert advice on this because there's been so much talk about Schumann resonance and talking about, again, baseline sort of 7.83 with spikes they've seen up to like 15 or 25 hertz, and particularly talking about it being with like 2019, 2020, like seeing a lot of these sort of spikes and changes and trying to relate it with, I think, different astrological events that are going on and stuff. So I wanted to get your feedback. Has the Schumann resonance been changing? And if it does, what's going on?
No, it's not. That's why I said there's a lot of misinformation about Schumann. It's just utter nonsense. The Schumann resonances are the same today. And I'm studying on a global network measuring this stuff 24/7.
Yeah.
Right. So
when I was looking at stuff on the Schumann resonance, basically HeartMath Institute comes up as one of the main places to check, and then some other place in Russia. So
I won't mention names, but we have the most sensitive magnetometers in the world, globally distributed, all time synchronized. So I really have a lot of confidence in what I'm saying here. The Schumann resonances today are exactly the same as they were when they were first measured in 1960. But remember, there's 8 of them.
Right.
You typically hear about is one, the 7.8 hertz. So there are backyard folks or people that really haven't done their homework that have a somewhat less sensitive magnetometer, right? And then suddenly something happens. And there are annual rhythms in these, by the way. The amplitudes of all the Schumann rhythms do have seasonal rhythms. They come and go every year. I mean, that's a repeating rhythm. It has to do, I won't go into all of that, but so you suddenly have a kind of a low sensitivity magnetometer, and one pops up, at, the 20 hertz frequency or the 14 hertz, or because there's 8, right? You suddenly see it and people are running off half cocked. I mean, I saw one maybe about a year ago, or a little, might have been more than that, out of another country. For the first time ever, 30 hertz is seen in the Schumann resonances. And I'm going, no. This has been known since 1960. It's the third Schumann resonance. Not the first time ever. It's one of the standard ones there. The Schumann resonances aren't changing. You're just seeing one, a little blip of one for the first time in your, not very sensitive equipment. So
depending on the
here's
equipment.
the thing. You don't want the Schumann resonances to change. They're controlled by the cavity, the ionospheric Earth cavity. It's the physical dimensions that set these waves. So if they're changing, it means the ionosphere Earth cavity is changing. The ionosphere is critical for life on Earth, at least as we know it. We really don't want that being mucked with.
So you don't want to get too excited if you're seeing major shifts in the Schumann resonance.
No, you kind of want to go, oh shit, excuse my language, what's going on? Go ahead. But this is not to take away from the importance of Schumann resonances, or the field line resonances, because really the point of all this, most people also who travel back in science class played with tuning forks, right? So tuning, basically showing the principle of resonant coupling. When two systems vibrate at the same frequency, you can transfer energy and information between them. With our tuning forks down here, we're using air molecules to mediate that. But it works exactly the same way with magnetics. You just don't need the air molecules. Get my cell phone out again. And if you think of all the magnetic waves around Jason and me right now, between TVs, radio, cell phones, they're all there,
Yeah.
And the way our cell phone or radio works is, I'm old enough, we used to have to turn dials on radios, remember?
Yeah.
We're changing the resonant frequency of that device, so that once it's the same frequency as the vibration that you want, you instantly transfer the energy and the information in, amplify it up, and there, you're having your phone call or you're listening to your radio station. So this is basic physics again, resonant coupling. So what I've just said is that our hearts and brains, all of us running around here on the planet Earth, are vibrating at the same frequency as Earth's 2 primary energetic systems. So we have the capacity to transfer energy and information to the larger field of the Earth. So when I'm in our formal write-ups of this, I call it a global, my take on it is it's a global information field. Now, I'm not new. I mean, other people have conceived of this long before me, collective unconscious and these different types of things. And so I'm just saying that's actually real. Now, a guy named Michael Persinger, you might know some of his work, actually Canadian. He passed away recently, unfortunately. He did some really cool work where he was measuring people's brain EEGs and brains and the Schumann resonances, across bunches of people, and showing that our brain waves literally regularly synchronize with the Earth's and the Schumann resonances. This is always going on, so that he would very much agree with what I'm saying, that we're constantly transferring energy and information back and forth, especially information between the global fields and in our hearts and brains. So this now gives us a plausible mechanism for one of those aspects of non-local intuition. How does mom know when their kids are upset or in harm's way on the other side of the planet? But we're all feeding the field. And I didn't go right into our work on intuition, but what the results clearly show is what tunes us, our receiver, to become resonant is what we care about. Mm-hmm. Literally, so something we really care about that tunes us to that information, out of the larger field. You know, what a mess it would be if mom was getting information from however many billions of kids are on the planet. You know?
Right.
That would be a nightmare, but it's who our kids we care about, or people we love and care about, that we tend to get those intuitive resonances with, or that we've connected with.
Right. No, that's all fascinating. And so then when there's major like solar or geomagnetic activity, then that's affecting the field line particularly.
Well, yeah,
right?
it affects all of it, because you can change the ion density in the ionosphere, and then you'll get more higher amplitude Schumann resonances and things like that. But yes, when you have a solar flare, if it happens to be pointed towards us, it's big plasma waves that travel through space. It takes about 2 to 3 days to get here. But when they hit the geomagnetic field, it creates havoc. It creates a disturbance. Magnetic field disturbance is what it's called. Now, interestingly, that doesn't happen that often. And there are, just to riff a little bit on that, Jason, there are many, many studies. I mean, stacks. I got literally stacks this high of papers sitting over here on another thing of studies that have looked at geomagnetic field disturbance. And the measure of that's called KP index, or AP. These are measures that have been around forever, long time. That are a measure of field disturbance that correlate with hospital admissions. So when the magnetic field is disturbed, I mean, these aren't subtle effects in some cases. You see more admissions for all kinds of things, especially mental and emotional things, depression, these types of things, but heart disease and strokes and et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of given this impression that it's a bad thing, you know, the field can harm us. And it's true when you have, you know, but these are almost all studies that have been done hospital admissions. So they're older people, usually have a comorbidity, and it's sort of the straw that broke the camel's back is the way to think of it. So you see these emotions go up. So, but it's still given this impression. Right. So we've published a number of studies where we were doing long-term HRV recording. These little devices, looks like this. Modern HRV recorders, very small, lightweight. So you can record HRV 24 hours a day for, in some cases, one study was 5 months of people. It's the longest probably recording ever done that I know of. And we were looking at both solar and geomagnetic things, and what we found, but in healthy people, right? Not looking at hospital admissions. So it's kind of like a signal averaging approach where you see lots of changes in solar wind and radio flux from the sun and cosmic rays and Schumann resonances and field line resonances and all these things. So they had many different occasions of it. So you really kind of start looking to see what's really going on. And lo and behold, I'd say I shouldn't keep being surprised, but what we found was that a lot of these things are actually, the way we interpret this is energy sources. HRV goes up and we feel better, do better when there's increased power in the Schumann resonances or the field line resonances, cosmic rays, or the solar radio flux. So these kind of our takeaways, these are all energy sources when we're attuned to them. Right? We just don't know it, right? And understand it. So in other words, there's a lot of benefits from being in sync with the earth. Now, interestingly, that another study where we looked at groups of 20 people in 5 countries, big study. We were looking specifically in that study at the synchronization of people with the earth and with each other. And in the middle of that study, 24-hour daily recorders over weeks, we had them do use a HeartMath technique called a heart lock-in. It's basically a heart meditation. Most of our techniques are in the moment, in the world regulation, but this is one where you really sit down and shift into a coherent state called heart focused breathing, and then you're radiating that love and compassion to others. So we had all these 100 and some people do this at the same time for 15 minutes in the middle of our study. And we're just getting this published now. But it was amazing that looking at the individual's level of synchronization with the earth over a 24-hour period. Looked at all the days. So the day they did that heart lock-in technique, got coherent for 15 minutes, their synchronization with the earth field was dramatically shifted. So they were more and more in sync with the earth. So just 15 minutes of being in a heart coherent state carried over into a 24-hour change in our being in sync with the rhythms of the earth. So kind of some neat stuff coming out here.
Yeah, that's I think that's also fascinating. And so then basically, just so I can understand this correctly, then when people do the like the heart math techniques and whatnot, when they basically get into that state of heart coherence, then they are in more resonance with the natural fields of the planet for the most part.
Well, I would say, first of all, more fundamental, they're getting more in sync with and aligned with themselves
Right.
and who they really are, their larger self, and creating more stability in their nervous system and their hormonal system. So that is certainly going. We are also radiating out our personal field environment that I talked about, a more coherent field. We can measure that, right?
Yeah.
Which helps others, and we're a lot more stable. Then that through resonance principles, us being more stable and coherent, yes, increases our coupling to the rhythms of the earth.
Fascinating. And so, because I know there's been, so then it sounds like if there is more solar or geomagnetic activity, like you said, that's almost like there's more power coming in, so to speak, more energy coming in. And if that person's in a state of alignment, then that actually can be a beneficial thing. But if they are incoherent, then it could become maybe potentially more of a not so beneficial thing.
In reality, I would probably still get the energy, but just use it in non-coherent ways. So I'll give you one example. There's a bunch of studies that are supporting what I've been saying here as energy sources. So when we work a lot, we have a collaboration with a couple of different universities in Lithuania, the hospital, cardiac hospital there, and the mathematics department. And so they've been publishing a lot with us on hospital missions and stuff. And one of the first studies they were doing, we have a magnetometer there in collaboration, with them. So they've been doing a lot of local magnetic field studies with hospital admissions. It put a new twist on things. So they were just looking at all the hospital admissions over a couple of years in the magnetic data, local magnetic field data. And they found that when the resonant, when I say magnetic power, I'm talking about the resonant frequencies now. Okay, just to state that, I don't have to keep saying it. When that power was lower, they had higher hospital admissions in an older population. Right, so more older people were being admitted.
Yeah.
Right. When the magnetic power, resonant power was higher, there were fewer admissions in the elderly population. Right. I'm not talking about KP index and disturbance. I'm talking about ongoing day-to-day magnetic activity. Now, what was interesting was that the trend was exactly reversed in the young people. When the field power was low, fewer admissions. When it was high, more hospital admissions for youngsters. But they weren't being admitted for the same reason. Right? The older people, it's strokes and heart disease and so on. The kids, they were being admitted because of accidents.
Okay.
So when the power was up, it's an energy source. That's their independent interpretation. This is an energy source. The kids, when the power, magnetic frequency resonant is up, they feel more energy, and they go out and do stupid things and get hurt. Right? The stuff you see on YouTube. So does that help? So it's more.
Yeah, no, I like the way that that's described, because I think I remember reading something with the HeartMath that was talking about when there was more solar geomagnetic activity, that correlated with a lot of major events that took place throughout human history. And it sounded like some were more like, would be perceived as a very beneficial thing, and some would be a negative thing that might be more like war or something along those lines.
Okay, now we're going to a different scale. Okay, so I've been talking about vast geomagnetic human. So that's actually what you're talking about there. It traces back to a Russian astrophysicist, Alexander Chesovsky was his name, kind of the father of the field in a way. Mm-hmm. And the short version is he was drafted into World War I, and so being an astrophysicist, keeping an eye on what the sun's doing, and it occurred to him that when there's more solar flares and sunspots and this kind of thing, that shortly after that, people down on Earth here in the middle of World War I, right, got kind of stupid, that there was an influx of bloodier battles, and just, it got him intrigued. Just, So after the war, he did a exhaustive study of human history back to 1749, which is how long at that time they had solar cycle data for. And then basically he made, I published a recreation of his original data. Really easier to see. Basically, what he did is he just took the number of major human events that occurred each year, from 1749 to 1926 when he first published it, and plotted them on a graph. And you see this kind of sine wavy looking graph. And then he plotted the solar cycle next to it, and they're almost an exact overlay.
Yeah.
I mean,
I thought that was astounding when I saw that.
Yeah. But then, so a lot of his data was things like revolutions, starts of wars, but they're major human events. That's what he called them, big things that had planetary. So another group, a bit later, a U.S. group actually, no, forget, maybe not. But anyway, they did a similar thing, but they looked at human flourishing. Right. So there's also a rhythm of scientific discoveries and, the flourishing of the arts and new music and these types of things. It also follows the same curve. Right. So the takeaway for me for this is, and back in Chesowski's time, by the way, things like X-rays, UV, none of that was known.
Right.
It's the 1920s. Right. None of that had been discovered yet. He actually intuited that there had to be some unknown radiations in the sun, and he wrote about this anticipatory effect. But we know all that now. So we live in the sun. It's an 11-year cycle. So the sun literally is emitting more energy in these other bands that we now can measure. The solar cycle stuff like the F-107 and these types of things, which is one of the beneficial ones that we saw, by the way, what's called the 2.8 gigahertz frequency from the sun. So basically, what I suggest here to think about this is it is literally an energy influx. And dependent upon how self-regulated we are, how mature we are, it depends on how that energy gets outgated and used. For politicians, and we're not, we start wars and conflict and separation. And that's why, or if we are more, we create new collaborations and invent new things and, the flourishing side.
Yeah, anyway, I think that was a really, when I first heard you talking about that in an interview probably a few years back, and I thought that was astounding. So I was checking it out too, because I thought, well, that's also just, it's when I see stuff like that, to me, it brings it back, like how important it is for us to take responsibility for our own physiology, because we are being inundated by a lot of different stuff that sometimes people don't get how those things can actually affect you. But regardless of them, we still can come back to a state of coherence within our own capacity.
Exactly. And that's the point. It doesn't, whatever the moon's doing, right, or the sun.
Right. We're not
or if you're in the middle of a noisy city.
Right.
Versus that it's really our capacity to maintain our coherence and our composure.
Yeah.
And our emotional stability, and not be as beat around by whatever those external things are, a noisy this or a solar flare or the moon, whatever.
Absolutely. Well, and that's what I think of as being resilient. That's where I feel you're not so at the mercy of how other people feel or what's going on in the world around you. You kind of create your own epicenter, and then you're in the driver's seat of that more so.
Yeah, but especially anchored into your larger self.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I love the way you explain that. So I want to be cognizant of time here too, Roland. I have one more thing I wanted to ask you here, or last two things, is when we talk about this concept of almost like entrainment, where if someone is in a coherent state and how that kind of opens up a field for others to possibly move into as well. Is there a tipping point? Is there sort of an idea of what kind of percentage of the global population, would sort of create a potential shift to make it easier to pull?
I'm not going to give a number here. I mean, I've got my own intuitive thoughts about that, and so others do too. But I don't know that it's so much to do with how many as it is to do with how coherent that number of people are. So coherence organizes noise, right? And if we're really able to be in our own higher vibration state of our own consciousness and stable, especially if we do it together, because there is a nonlinear amplification effect that we know, I think the research suggests as well, that we can put a stronger coherent signal into the environment, and that into the larger field environment, not just locally, but globally. And I'm talking about through this coupling mechanism. And that helps others, right, that are maybe on the cusp of waking up, right, or shifting their perspectives. So probably a good way to end this, my call to action for anybody listening to this would be to, hey, pause throughout the day as often as you can and do an inner check. We call it spot check. Check where I'm at. What am I feeding the field? Mm-hmm. And ask yourself, what am I feeding the field? How much of it really is vibrations and feelings of love, compassion, kindness versus fear, anxiety, frustrations because I didn't get my to-do list done, enough fast enough. Because part two of that is what we feed the field matters. Right? It has real measurable effects in the larger world.
Yeah. Well, and you said something really important there too, where you said not necessarily the number of people, but the degree of coherence. And that reminds me a lot. One of my teachers for a long time was Dr. David Hawkins, and he wrote a book called Power versus Force a long time, a number of other books. And he would talk a lot about levels of consciousness, and that higher levels of consciousness, it was a logarithmic scale. So when you would have certain people that would hold a very high state of consciousness, they would effectively influence potentially millions of other people. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I feel like, and that seems to be my reality anyways, when I've been in contact with other people that I think do hold a very high state of consciousness, you can see how that affects a larger community. So wonderful. Roland, one last thing is, what do you think is possible if we were starting to get to that tipping point, or we did have enough a shift in people getting into that heart-brain coherence state? What do you think the world would start to move towards?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's a kind of a hard one to answer. I could tell a story here about this, but some exercises I've tried to do to get people to envision that, and it's really hard to get outside of our current dimensional box sometimes. But on the practical side, the most important thing I think we can be doing to actually achieve that and find out the answer to that is radiating love into the field environment more consistently. That frequency in particular. But I mean, there's the obvious stuff. The politicians call a war and nobody shows up. Right. Here, another way of saying it at a kind of practical level, although my vision isn't limited to this. I used to say, because I'd read this, and couldn't ever really find the source of it, that with 10% of the world's military budget, that every person on Earth could be fed, have clean water, housing, and educated. Okay, 10%. I've recently learned that I was wrong. I actually found the person, Celia Ellsworthy, who's wrote a book on this and been nominated for several Nobel Peace Prizes and things. It's actually far less than 10% of the world's military budget that could be done. So this is an awesome, I think, not awesome, but a good illustration of the problem is consciousness, not technology.
Yeah.
We can do that now, right?
Yeah.
Just 10% less on bombs and war. And we could solve a lot of the root causes of the things that we're spending the 90% for. But that's a problem in consciousness. So that would be an obvious thing, right? People would be fed, housed. But ultimately, I think the even more important is that we finally can rise above the mind frequency, the 3D mind of the separations, and actually start getting along with one another. And that is huge. But also, I think there's another dimension of human operation that we can move into that becomes, what we would call now magical.
Yeah.
But magic in this case is always, we just don't understand something, people use this analogy, not just me, but if we could time travel back a couple thousand years and have a Bic lighter in our pocket and flick it, how we would be, gods and deities and magic, right? But it's right from a higher level of consciousness. It's not magic. It's just same thing. I think the same thing occurs.
Yeah.
And we would be looking at a similar shift, to the Bic lighter to now in that shift that you're asking about. So it's hard to really imagine what all that would be.
I think that's beautiful, and that's part of the fun too. I think this is the whole thing with shifts in consciousness. It's like you don't really know what it feels like, what it can look like until you're actually in there. It's like try being in a place of fear and worry, and then fall head over heels in love, and see how your world flips around, which you could never have perceived here, but all of a sudden looks very different here. I feel like this is part of the excitement of what's going on right now. Is I think there is a potential for a different shift in consciousness, and could be moving into things that brand new experiences that could be really exciting.
It's only 18 inches away.
Roland, where can we send people to learn more of the information that you're doing, more of the stuff around HeartMath? Where's the best place to send people to learn more of the work, and to gain access to some of these tools?
Yeah, heartmath.org, our website. There is a .com and a .org, but .org is where we do all the research. There's a library with lots of free papers, lots of free resources and accesses. And if anybody does want to purchase, one of the devices, to measure your HRV and coherence, go to the .org. It helps support our research. So I appreciate
Wonderful.
it.
Yes, I will make sure all the links are in the show notes. And Dr. McCrady, what a pleasure. It's a conversation I've wanted to have with you for a couple of years. So thanks so much for being a part of it.
My pleasure. And everybody have a great rest of your day, and take care.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.